Oh, welcome. So we'll look at municipal insurance and the question of joint and several liability. This is a paper that we wrote, like Andrea said, for all these great organizations. Again, first of all, this paper here, before we get started on the paper, we're going to start off with our land acknowledgement. We recognize and appreciate the historic connection of Indigenous people with these territories. We support their effort to sustain and grow their nation. We recognize the contributions that they've made in shaping and strengthening local communities in the province and of Canada. So we have three main offices. We have our Thunder Bay office, which is on the Robinson Superior Treaty, and the land which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Fort William First Nation. Sudbury, which is on the Robinson Huron Treaty, which the land is traditional territory of the Akameshneag, Anishinaabe, as well as the Wanapitei First Nation. And Kirkland Lake, our office, which is having its official opening today, is on the Robinson Huron Treaty and is the traditional land of the Cree, Ojibwe, Algonquin, and Beaver House First Nations people. So what is Northern Policy Institute? We are a think tank that conducts independent policy work to provide evidence-based solution to sustain and grow the region of Northern Ontario. So we are in the north for the north, as we can see from our all of our three main offices, and also right now during our summer with our Experience North interns, we have summer interns in various places throughout Northern Ontario, including Thunder Bay, Kenora, and West Nipissing and Timmins. So this paper here is part of the Northern Analyst Collective. The Northern Analyst Collective is a project of NPI, which allows members to timeshare a professional policy analyst. So basically, we're getting professional services at an accessible price for even the smallest municipality within their budget. So it's going to give a brief outline of the talk. First, I'll start off with insurance and why is it so expensive. Then I'll move into a bit of a law adjacent field, in which is basically is the problem of joint and several liability to blame for why insurance is expensive? Then we'll follow into alternatives about joint and several liability, and also look at other ways to change insurance prices, including insurance changes and the creation of insurance mutuals. So, like Andrea said, she provided this data for me. Insurance costs this is a selection of northwestern Ontario municipalities, but insurance has climbed. I mean, we all hear about inflation right now, but 21% is much higher than the headline inflation number as we see at the moment, and so we're going to have to find ways and strategies for looking at this, for how to reduce this. However, right now for insurance, unfortunately, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but insurance is in a bit of a tough spot right now, especially for the fundamentals. The insurance market right now is known as a hard market. Hard markets are basically happens when you have very low interest rates. So the way that insurance companies work is they'll take the premiums money, invest that in the stock market, in the market, bonds or whatever, in a mix, a very secure mix. And when basically that can't really grow fast, it means that they depend a lot more on premiums. So premiums are basically funding most of the claims instead of having a mix of premiums and investing income. Now, now that the interest rates are trying to climb up, they're doing a bit better on the investment side, although we have a market crash right now, so that's certainly not helping. And also for the past 2 years, we've also had inflation on replacement costs. We all know somebody's trying to buy a car right now. We all know that the used car market has gone bonkers. The price of lumber for replacing buildings has gone higher. And so on that side, insurance companies are having to pay out more and depending more on premiums. On the other hand, too, they're also realizing that now that global warming is an actuarial fact, they've had to recalculate a lot of their risk models. So global warming has basically forced, even though global warming might not directly affect the government insurance area, a lot of the government insurance is basically backed by reinsurance, which is basically insurance on insurance, and that helps reduce costs for insurance companies, because if they have a massive payout, well, the company's not really feeling the brunt of it. It goes to their insurance, but that also costs money. And with global warming means that reinsurance market is getting ever more tightened. So Hurricane Ida, for example, was a very expensive hurricane. Didn't ever really affect Canadians, but since reinsurance is basically a global market, that sucked up a lot of the reinsurance market. So a lot of it more is having to be passed on to the end user, and that's also increasing prices. So we see here from Insurance Bureau of Canada, we basically seeing that loss events are getting much more expensive and a lot more frequent. So these are, this one here is the Fort Mac fire. If you can see my mouse, the 2016 Fort Mac. But you also see that we have a trend of increasing severity. And these 2019 and 2020 numbers, these are more lower bounds because claim coverage for those events are not completely finished yet, and they're bound to go higher. So basically what we're seeing right now is we are seeing a market that is being stressed by multiple impacts. So one of the things that often gets blamed for this is joint and several liability, which is the current system of torts in Ontario, which is based on the common law principle of whoever has been harmed is made whole to the best extent possible. So one of the things with this, though, is that Ontario uses a contributory negligence model. For US people from US law, this is called comparative negligence in the US. Oftentimes they'll have the same term with the US, but with different stuff, especially if you've got parliamentary procedure and all that. But so, for example, if a plaintiff is responsible for 20% of a tort, like for example, they were not wearing a seatbelt and they got injured because they weren't wearing they got seatbelt. Well, the courts have a bit of common sense saying, okay, you cannot be the author of your own misfortune and get paid for this. So they're going to reduce the amount of the award. So if someone was texting while driving, or for example, if something was not properly maintained, they'll reduce the award. So for example, if a trip and fall and the person was not paying attention to where they were walking, that could also reduce the amount because they are partially responsible for their tort. So the process of joint and several liability has been examined multiple times. The two key ones that went thoroughly into this was the Law Reform Commission of Saskatchewan of 1997 and the Ontario Law Commission of Ontario in 2011. They basically found that because insurance markets are basically centered around the averages and not solely on the theoretical maximum payout, although that does play a role towards the it's a small contributor to the total cost of insurance, and it's not doesn't have a large or a significant impact on it, but it could have a significant impact in shortchanging a plaintiff in the case of an insolvent defendant. So we'll talk to insolvent defendants and this is where a lot of it comes with municipalities, because unfortunately municipalities are often on the hook for torts in which they are partially responsible. For example, we have the case of, I think I'll go ahead next. So we have, for example, a trip and falls on cracks, right? So I'll go into that right now. So municipalities, unlike corporations, have to serve everybody equally. They can't just abandon a market. So the courts have realized that and basically have given municipalities tort defenses that are unavailable to private corporations, because you got to balance out equities in this process. So, for example, if a city it does due diligence and say patrolling their sidewalks to make sure that there's no discontinuities larger than 20 millimeters on the sidewalks, then they basically make a reasonable effort to verify for that. Municipalities can and have one in court basically saying that, no, we looked at this 6 months ago, it wasn't there 6 months ago, we don't have an infinite budget to look at the sidewalks every day, so we're doing the best that we can with this. There's a way of limiting exposure. However, that also means that the municipality has to show that they were able, they had a regular patrol, they had a plan for it, and they had maintenance records to back up their assertions. The other thing too, you have a case here from Eric Winters in Haldimand County, where those duty of care do not apply to activities that are dangerous in their face. Involves a case of a high school student who had skipped class and hang out with friends in the park, and he climbed a tree and the branch broke, and unfortunately he injured himself in the fall. Well, the judge in that court said, well, the city doesn't have an unlimited budget. They can't have someone staff each park 24 hours a day to make sure that people don't do dangerous things. Therefore, the person who climbed the tree assumed the burden of climbing the tree. So again, sometimes lawyers can be party poopers saying, oh, we can't do this because of exposure. But oftentimes too, there is a certain amount of common sense that goes into this matter. And another thing too that we've seen, especially with advertising, about how Canadian lawyer advertising are resembling a lot more how the U.S. system of law and see some of the crazy amounts of U.S. law. Well, many aspects of what is so-called tort reform in the U.S. has already come standard in Canadian law. So, for example, in the 1970s, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court basically wrote that, well, pain and suffering, well, we can't directly measure that. So we can't really make you whole as much as it can, because money doesn't reduce pain. It can help with you can help people with rebuilding their house to make sure that they can walk, they can use their house if they become paralyzed, but we can't really recompense for pain. So we have a monetary statutory cap on pain and suffering awards. The courts in Canada are much less politicized, and there's a lot less circuit splits. So there's much less forum shopping. So there's a lot less cases of trying to pick a favorable judge. So in the US, if anything, you have any lawsuit related to credit cards, it's going to happen in Delaware, because Delaware has the best case law for dealing with credit cards. And that's also why a lot of companies are incorporated in Delaware in the US. It's because they have favorable courts there. Canada doesn't have that problem as much. There's a lot of technical aspects of the Canadian court system that are much more streamlined, and we don't have endless depositions, appeals, and the like. And the other thing too is, in the U.S., anybody can can file a suit, and it's up to the lawyers to make sure they're not bringing frivolous lawsuits. Canada has a lose or pay principle, where basically the losing party is responsible for a portion of the winning party's legal costs. And this is to make sure that when you're bringing a legal action, you've got to make sure that this legal action makes sense and it's not going to get laughed out of court, or else you are on the hook for a substantial amount. And so another thing too that we have here is for municipalities is we have in Ontario, we have shortened notice period. Usually it's two years to file a claim for notice for torts. Well, for slip and falls, it's 10 days. The reason being is it's 10 days because we want to make sure that if an area is dangerous, we want to fix it. We want to be notified as soon as possible so we can fix it. And so this is to encourage rapid problem solving. So as much as I sound like a defender of joint and several liability, it's kind of like that old Churchill quote about democracy being one of the worst systems for government, except for every other system that we've tried. But there are other ways of doing it too, and this is kind of what happened with in 2014 with the private members bill by MP Randy Pettipies, looking at modifying joint and several liability. Ministry Attorney General was very excited, and so we started looking at what are the second and third order impacts of this would change. So if people recover less, and unfortunately, yes, cities are often found as the deep-pocketed defendant, and this is bad for cities. Everybody rapidly admits this. Having more people unable to collect from someone who is proximate to the accident means that it would overwhelm Ontario services like OHIP and ODSP, and it basically be shifting problems away from the proximate cause of the accident. So one of the things with Saskatchewan, which when they looked at reforming their joint and several liability system in the mid-2000s, was basically kind of a hybrid approach. So the Saskatchewan model basically keeps joint and several liability for a blameless victim. But if the victim was partially responsible, partially negligent, and they're basically they are responsible for part of it. So this is going to sound a bit complex, so I'm just going to switch over here to a bit of math here and show how it works. So we have in the Let me just bring up the telestrator here. Oh, sorry, try and bring up the telestrator. All right, so basically, we have an equal case where the liability is set at $100,000, and the plaintiff was basically responsible for 20% of their own misfortunes. So basically, right now we have 20,000 taken right off the top, right? That's 20,000 of 100 is the same. Now, what happens though is the way that joint several liability is that the plaintiff gets to go after the defendant, and the defendant sort out among themselves on who's going to pay. And if one can't pay, it goes to whoever can pay. And like I said, unfortunately, municipalities are often in this unenviable position. So in this case here, if the municipality, which was also which is D2, which was also responsible for 20% of the misfortune, they were responsible for defendant one's $50,000 and defendant three's $10,000 for a total of $80,000 going to the plaintiff. However, in the Saskatchewan model, the way it works is basically you are responsible for your percentage of everyone else's outstanding share. So since D2, the defendant, the city here, is responsible for 20% of the overall share, it's 20% of 50,000, which gives you 10,000. And 20% of 10,000, which is 2,000. So in the end, D2 here is only responsible for $32,000, which is 40% of the initial award. So this is basically how it kind of simplifies things, how it move this down. Oh, I need to clear the telestrator. Okay, so there are other ways too of reducing insurance costs. Again, so this is also system agnostic as well. So whether it's joint and several liability or Saskatchewan model, Waterloo in the 1990s, they set up a scheme where they would bulk buy insurance for the cities, the townships, and the entire region. So basically, you're basically getting a bulk deal for the entire region. However, implementing this is really hard in practice because while it really helps smaller municipalities, because your cost per insured resident is so much higher for small municipalities than large municipalities, it really gives great savings to small municipalities. Large municipalities have little benefit from joining these schemes. So basically, they are helping out the smaller municipalities, but they're not really helping themselves out. And this is something that I'm all got in the recommendations about how maybe if we get some sweeteners in to have larger to facilitate this risk pooling, it can be a way of fixing this problem of reducing the costs for insurance for everybody. So mutuals are another way of dealing with insurance, and mutuals are a very old insurance technique. Basically, by mutual insurance is you have a group where people where you insure where basically you're focusing on an airline, and it's basically similarly situated individuals or cities or governments insuring each other and basically what a mutual also does is because you're doing an airline, it's basically doctors or cities or dentists or schools. Because you are in a very narrow line, you get to see and share best practice from each other. You're better able to lower risk and tailor coverage. So basically, by tailor coverage, you're not buying insurance for stuff that you don't need, and you are basically sharing your risk management techniques. Australia was in a very similar situation to Ontario in 1992. The private insurance market had basically disappeared for government insurance in the 1990s. And so what the Victoria government did is they created a Victoria State mutual insurance. It had a different name at the time, but now it's called liability mutual insurance. And what they found is this, even though it acts as an insurer of last resort, it has drastically lowered the cost of insurance for the municipalities of Victoria, and has basically given them comparable insurance to what you would get from a private market, increased coverage in the private market for about the same price as the private market. So basically, so if you want to tailor it down, you can also execute the savings that way. But basically, this is every city that joins the scheme in Victoria basically insure each other, and then for larger claims they have reinsurance. One of the problems with this, though, unfortunately, is that you kind of have a system where, since they have to mandate insurance to people. Cities that can have lower insurance rates in the private market are joining into the private market, so the risk pool is getting worse and worse over time, and they're currently working through possible reform to the system. I know probably if you follow the U.S. politics, you kind of saw something similar when it came to the U.S. insurance reforms, health insurance reforms of about 12, 15 years ago. So now we come up to the Belgian model. So this is kind of like the Cadillac end of it. And one way of thinking of this, it's basically a reciprocal with something like the Caisse de dépôt Quebec staple on top of it. It's a state-owned insurance and investment company. So each state and the federal government has a share into ETIAS. And it's diversified from insurance into a consulting company, a real estate acquisition holding and management company, sustainable investment fund, and a tech holding company. So it's very broad, and it's able to cross-subsidize each other. So it's a very broad system. They have some of the most competitive municipal insurance rates in Europe because of these cross synergies. But it's something that grew organically over 100 years of Belgian history. So one of the things that when looking at this too, for one of the quick wins for this, was to roll back decreases in mandatory insurance coverage. So one of the things that's happened in the past, since I believe 2014 or 2016, I'll have to check my notes, but basically to reduce insurance costs for everyday consumers, basically mandatory coverages have been reduced. And so the idea here, by rolling back those decreases, is we're basically making sure that more solvent people people who have most directly caused the harm or are more directly available to pay into the restitution. But like I said, it goes against government policies for reducing insurance claims in Ontario. So this is could be a theoretically quick win. Short term is, again, like I said earlier, was buying insurance at scale to reduce costs, but you would need a couple of sweeteners from the province to help get larger municipalities on board. And medium term too is mutual insurance. Mutual insurance, again, has a proven track record of lowering insurance, but they can sometimes be fragile because they don't have the same scale as a multinational insurance company. And it can also lead to adverse selection if they're insured of last resort. But the lack of profit motive, they've basically shown that lack of profit motive can lower your insurance costs by about 6 to 7%. Not quite the 20% that we saw in the increase earlier, but that's also because there's a lot of, like I said earlier, there's a lot of structural factors that are driving the cost of insurance right now, and these don't really help mitigate with those. And the long-term stretch option, again, is the Belgian model. Unfortunately, it's worked for Belgium, but it's also worked for Belgium. It doesn't mean they can be replicated in Ontario. It would be very hard to replicate, and there's a lot of moving parts. And so, So I'm gonna stop here and see if I have any questions on this.
If anyone has any questions, you can use the chat function, or you can just raise your hand and I will go to you. But Martin, while we're waiting for some questions, I do have one. What are, you had mentioned you need to give some of the larger municipalities a sweetener.
A subsidy.
Yes, for in order to have them buy into the mutual insurance. What are some of those options that the municipalities can use to try and get them into that?
So again, every system is going to be very specific. Insurance, unfortunately, is a very specific market because insurance people love predictability. They don't like unknowns. And so a lot of times when the groups municipalities together to lower their price for a bulk buy, they want similarly situated municipalities. And we all know in Northern Ontario, every municipality has its own unique charm and opportunities and challenges. So it's going to be finding a way of bolting them together in a coherent unit and being able to sell that as a bulk buy for the insurance. Because the problems that, say, Thunder Bay is facing may not be necessarily the same as Ignace. Even though Ignace is within driving range, it's also within driving range, but it's also very large distances and very different organizations. So it's insurance people, again, like I said, insurance people are not the fun ones at parties. They're like the ones the very predictable, be able to produce. Because the thing is they want to get their math right. They're working on averages, and if they set their price too high, well, they're losing business. If they set their price too low, they're losing money. And so they're trying to make sure that they can offer a competitive product at a proper price.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another question then, just to kind of piggyback on that. So if a bunch of smaller municipalities go in together on something like this, is that sustainable? And what kind of mechanisms would be in place to have that? Or do you need that
so
your municipality to get it going?
Again, so what Waterloo has done is they went for commercial insurance, commercially through the private marketplace as a bulk buy. Again, right now insurance markets right now are considered, it's a hard market, and a lot of companies, now that they're coming out of COVID, they're realizing they can't get their old insurance policy back anymore because the insurance companies have realized that, oh, we weren't pricing this risk properly, and we were and a lot of things, basically, insurance companies realized over the past 2 years, oh, we weren't pricing in risk properly. And so a lot of companies, like a lot of bars right now, have a lot of trouble finding commercial insurance because of the realities of the market. I'm sorry to sound like a party pooper here, but insurance is a very complicated subject. I know enough to be from the investment side of things, but their actuarial tables are very complex, and again, they're just trying to make sure that everything is predictable, and the world is getting less predictable.
Mm-hmm. And then, so for municipalities that might be joining us today, what would their next step be right now? What will we do?
So a lot of it is concentrate on the risk mitigation strategies. I know it sounds like almost like the classic party pooper line, but it's a lot of it is, again, make sure our maintenance standards are up to date. Make sure that everything is documented. Waterloo was able to win a trip and fall this year because they had properly documented that they looked out after their sidewalks. They had been inspected a couple months earlier, and when they sent an engineer there to measure the gap was within acceptable norms, and so the judge tossed out the claim. So. Oh, sorry, give me a second here. My Roomba just started itself, and I'm going to stop it.
And so what about that? Is there anything they can do? And so in that case, for example, then the municipality would still have to take that upfront cost to even get that case dismissed, right? So that is that's a huge cost to municipalities.
Yes, documentation. Yes, that has its own cost as well.
Yeah, exactly. So is that kind of the solution at this point, or can you foresee some other ways of maybe even not having these cases go to trial in the first place?
Well, yeah, and this is one of the things too. One of the reasons why Ontario automobile insurance is more expensive is it has very generous automatic benefits, where you skip the trial part, because that was the idea, was we have those benefits and then we clear out the courts. But it's also gone into there's been a whole bunch of arguing about, okay, well, how do we measure someone's how damaged they were in the accident, and that's where it actually ends up going into the courts. But that's basically what the idea was when we increased our mandatory coverages as a province, with the idea that okay, if someone gets enough money for rehab, they don't need to go to the courts to get that money for rehab.
Okay.
But the medical costs have increased, and it's been a challenge. It's a very complex problem. I'm sorry to say there's not one very easy solution. It's not like this one easy step. It's a lot of it too is making sure that, and I know paperwork is often the things that people will leave to the next day, and unfortunately the way the court is set up, it's they like paperwork to prove that you've done what you've done.
Yeah. Well,